Namaste and Jai Swaminarayan. Welcome to the next video in the series of Akshar-Purushottam Darshan and Introduction. Today we're going to do a deep dive into the Akshar-Purushottam Darshan, specifically looking at the Akshar-Purushottam Darshan in a much more formal way, defining certain terms, defining entities, and looking more into the journey for those in the Akshar-Purushottam Darshan. So the very first question for any darshan, especially in Vedanta, is how many entities are there? This refers to something known as Tattvagnan, the knowledge of tattvas or metaphysical entities. And so in the Akshar-Purushottam Darshan, there are 5 eternal and distinct entities. Again, eternal and distinct. These are 5 entities that are always eternal, right? Never beginning or ending, they're forever there and distinct. Each one is separated or different from one another. And so you have Jiva, Ishwar, and Maya, followed by Brahm and Parabrahm. You could think of this more in a hierarchy. Jivas are on the bottom. On top of them are Ishwars, then Maya, then Brahm, and then Parabrahm. You see that there's a line between Maya and Brahm, and we'll discuss why this is in a moment. But first, we're going to look at the first or the top 2 entities, Brahm and Parabrahm, right? Brahm or Akshar Brahm is another name, or Akshar, and Parabrahm or Paramatma. Parabrahm refers to the highest entity, that is Supreme God. Right? Very simply put, Parabrahm is Supreme God. The second highest entity is Akshar Brahm. This is known as Brahm. And this is not to be confused with the Brahm that is talked about in other Vedanta philosophies that we looked at. For example, in Vishishtadvaita, there are 3 entities, and it talks about sentient, non-sentient, and Brahm. Typically, in that regards, Brahm refers to Supreme God or God. So what is Brahm then? What is this Akshar Brahm? This is the uniqueness of the Akshar-Purushottam Darshan, the second highest entity. This entity, Brahm, is higher than Maya, which we'll talk about a little bit later. However, is still under Parabrahm, Supreme God. And so first we will begin with Supreme God. We will begin with Parabrahm. There are 4 aspects of Parabrahm. Now, there are many things that we can talk about here, but there are 4 key aspects of Parabrahm to understand. First, Sarvopari. Sarvopari means supreme. Parabrahm is above all entities, transcends all. There's nothing above Parabrahm. Otherwise, it wouldn't be called supreme. For anything to reign supreme, it needs to be a singular, right? As well as the topmost, right? You can't say that this is the supreme pizza if you have, another pizza that's better than that, right? So Sarvopari, supreme, right? That Parabrahm, that supreme God, is inherently supreme. Second is Sarvakarta. Sarvakarta means all doer. This is where in the Akshar-Purushottam Darshan, Parabrahm is believed to be the cause of all causes, is the inner controller of all entities, sole creator, sustainer, and destroyer of all, hence all doer, right? Everything in this universe is due to Parabrahm and Parabrahm's wish. The third aspect is Sakar. Sakar meaning with a divine form, right? That Parabrahm, that God has a divine yet a human-like form. Bhagwan Swaminarayan in his discourses in the scripture known as the Vachanamrita explains that his form, that Parabrahm's form, is a teenage form with 2 hands, 2 feet, right? Looks like a human. However, is not a human, is a divine body. Right? It is incomprehensible for our minds to understand. However, it is a divine, splendid, and human-like form, however, not human, in the transcendental abode. The fourth form is pragat. Pragat meaning manifest, manifest on earth. Parabrahma is the one who can provide liberation, right, to all the aspirants, to the jeeves, which we will look at. And so Parabrahma can either be manifest as himself or through the Brahmaswarup Guru. Right? We talked about earlier in the basics that the Brahmaswarup Guru, who is Akshar, right? That Brahmaswarup Guru grants liberation, right, to those aspirants of the Akshar-Purushottam Darshan, or to all, and to all. And so this is the fourth form of Parabrahma, or fourth aspect, that Parabrahma is manifest either as himself or through within the Brahmaswarup Guru. So these are the four key aspects of Parabrahma. Sarvopari, supreme. Sarvakarta, all-doer. Sakar, with the form. Pragat, with manifest on earth to grant liberation. Now we look at the second highest entity, Akshar Brahm. We talked about Akshar Brahm being the ideal servant, the ideal for all aspirants of the Akshar-Purushottam Darshan to look up to, having the highest spiritual state, of course, under Supreme God, but achieving that high spiritual state like Akshar Brahm. Right, we talked about in the basics that the goal is to ultimately understand that one's form is like Akshar Brahm, one is Brahm, and to worship Parabrahm, or Supreme God. And so what are the four quote-unquote forms of Akshar Brahm? One key thing to know here, there's only one form of Akshar Brahm. There's only one entity named Akshar Brahm. However, there are four quote-unquote forms or functions that Akshar Brahm plays a role in. And so the first is Akshardham. It is a physical divine abode of Parabrahm. It is where Parabrahm, Supreme God, resides. It is where the Sevak form, the attendant form of Akshar Brahm resides, and where liberated souls, known as Akshar Muktas, reside. And so Akshar Muktas, these are liberated souls. We talked about how liberation, of course, is the main goal for those in the Akshar-Purushottam Darshan. And so when one becomes liberated, postmodern, they become known as Akshar Muktas, being worthy of offering wholehearted devotion at the feet of Parabrahm. And so the first form is the physical, the actual divine abode, known as Akshardham. The second is the Sevak form. This is the personal attendant of Parabrahm. This Sevak form of Akshar Brahm serves as the ideal devotee, how we saw before, and is the ideal to all the Akshar Muktas residing in Akshardham. The Sevak form is which carries out Parabrahm's wishes. Right? Parabrahm may have a wish and looks at Akshar Brahm at this Sevak form, which then carries out the process of whatever the wish Parabrahm may have. The third form is Chidakash. Chidakash is the conscious space supporting the universes. It is a space that supports the infinite universes. And Chidakash is also seen as a form of Akshardham. It is a part of Akshardham. And so Chidakash, the conscious space that supports the universes, right? This is how Akshar Brahm also acquires the quality of all-knower. Right? Ultimately, Parabrahm, Supreme God, is all-knower. However, Akshar Brahm acquires this quality because Akshar Brahm is also in a form of Chidakash, the space that supports the universe. And finally, the Brahmaswarup Guru, the human form. The human form in each universe whom Parabrahm lives within and continues the work of liberation. And so the Brahmaswarup Guru, right? This is a form of Akshar Brahm, whom Parabrahm is manifest within in order to carry out the work of liberation. And so we talked about Akshar Brahm and Parabrahm, but now we go down to the other three, Jeev, Ishwar, and Maya. Right? And so we start all the way on the bottom, or all the way on the left if we looked at the graphic, known as Jeev. A Jeev is a distinct and individual soul. It comes from the Sanskrit verb Jeev, which means to breathe or to live. Bhagwan Swaminarayan explained that the Jeev is uncuttable, unpierceable, immortal. It is conscious. It is the size of an atom. In short, it is known as Sat Chit and Anand. It is Sat, it is true. It is Chit, it is conscious, and Anand, it is blissful. Right? And so the Jeev, right? The Jeev is the distinct individual soul. Then you have Ishwars, which are above Jeevs. Metaphysically speaking, the Ishwars are higher than Jeevs, but they're still bound within Maya. Ishwars serve as a role in functioning the universes by the grace of Parabrahm. Ultimately, Parabrahm, Supreme God, is the all-doer, all-knower. But it is due to his wish and his grace that Ishwars have the opportunity to function each of the universes. The famous Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, the famous Trimurti. Brahma being the creator, Vishnu being the sustainer, Shiv being the destroyer. Right? They fall within this category of Ishwars. All the Devtas and Devis fall within the category of Ishwars. Because they serve a role in the functioning of the Brahmand. However, they are not Supreme God. And they cannot attain moksha. Only Jeevs have the opportunity to attain moksha. Then this comes to Maya. What is Maya? Right? Maya is the only non-sentient entity in all of these. So Jeevs, Ishwars, Brahm, and Parabrahm are all sentient. Maya is the only non-sentient entity. It is characterized by the three guns, Sattva gun, Rajogun, Tamogun. We can see a chart right here that nicely shows the process of creation and how, right, Sattva gun, Rajogun, Tamogun come from Maya. And Maya forms the ignorance of the Jeevs and Ishwars. And so Bhagwan Swaminarayan would often say that, simply put, Maya is anything that hinders one, right, to attain the full realization of Parabrahm, right, to offer devotion to Parabrahm, or to Supreme God. However, Maya is also an instrument of Parabrahm, and this is a unique part that Maya, it may seem on the outside that it is bad. However, it's not. It is an instrument of Parabrahm, right? Jeevs and Ishwars are bound within Maya. And that line we saw post, after Maya, the only two entities that are eternally transcending Maya is Akshar Brahm and Parabrahm. And Jeevs within Maya have the opportunity, right, by the grace of Parabrahm, to overcome this Maya, to become one with Akshar Brahm and worship Parabrahm. And as we said before, that this is known as an Akshar Mukta. And so Maya is an instrument of Parabrahm to carry out the necessary functions of the universes. And hence, it is also an eternal and distinct entity. And so how can a Jeev, right, anything with an Atma, anything with the soul in short, and that could be all of us specifically, any humans, how can a Jeev in the Akshar-Purushottam Darshan overcome Maya? And so there are two types of liberation, like we talked about before. We talked about moksha being the ultimate postmodern liberation that many Hindus talk about. But in the Akshar-Purushottam Darshan, there are two distinct types of liberation or salvation. First is Videhi Mukti. This is the traditional way you would think about it, that following someone's death, physical death, they attain a state of an Akshar-Mukt. They go to the ranks of an Akshar-Mukt, the liberated soul, who has achieved that purpose, right, of identifying oneself as Brahm and worshipping Parabrahm. And they attain a spot in Akshardham. The second is Jivan Mukti. It's the unique part of the Akshar-Purushottam Darshan. Again, that liberation while alive, that you can attain, that one can attain the highest spiritual state while they are on earth. Right? They don't have to only feel or attain liberation after physically passing away, but they can feel it and attain it while on earth. And so we looked at in the basics how a jiv can attain mukti or moksha or liberation, salvation. And so again, just to reiterate that in a nutshell, it is to be worthy of the grace of Parabrahm, right? To be worthy of the grace of Parabrahm, because remember that this whole thing, because Parabrahm, Supreme God is all doer, is only due to the grace of Parabrahm. So to be worthy of the grace of Parabrahm, one must follow Bhagavata Dharma, or it's called Ekantik Dharma, right? We looked at the 4 pillars. Through the guidance and association of the Brahmaswarup. Ultimately, it is through the guidance and association through thought, word, and deed of the Brahmaswarup Guru that allows one to acquire the virtues necessary to become like Akshar Brahm, known as Brahmarup, and worship Parabrahm, worship God. Okay? Ultimately, it is due to the Brahmaswarup Guru that this is possible. And so association through the mind, word, and deed of the Akshar Brahma Guru is key, because the Akshar Brahma Guru is that ideal, is Akshar Brahm, right? We looked at a form of Akshar Brahm is the Brahmaswarup Guru. Hence, the Akshar Brahm Guru, the Brahmaswarup Guru is Akshar Brahm and has Parabrahm manifest within him. Right? That Parabrahm is manifest within the Akshar Brahmaswarup Guru in order to carry out liberation, in order to carry out the work of liberation, providing a means of liberation. And so this is why many times in the Akshar-Purushottam Darshan, it is said that, there are people who have never read a single page of a scripture, but they have fully realized and attained, right, the entire purpose of the Akshar-Purushottam Darshan. Why? Because they follow the words of the Akshar Brahm Guru, the Brahmaswarup Guru. By following the Brahmaswarup Guru, one will inevitably, by following the Brahmaswarup Guru, one will acquire the virtues and qualities necessary to become like Brahm and worship Parabrahm. And so, when endeavoring towards one's liberation in the Akshar-Purushottam Darshan, first it is the grace of Parabrahm. Parabrahm is so compassionate to give jivs free will, of course, to an extent, right? In order for the jiv to make that effort to attain the grace of Parabrahm, right? To attain that compassion again from Parabrahm. Is also to attain Ekantik Dharma, developing and attaining the 4 cardinal qualities. There are many different virtues and qualities of the Akshar Brahm, that one must attain. However, these are the 4 cardinal qualities that you can think of. The third part is attaining a similarity to Akshar Brahm. This is known as Brahmarup, attaining the highest spiritual state, right? That state can be attained right now when following the words of the Akshar Brahmaswarup Guru, the Brahmaswarup Guru. And fourth, attaining the highest bhakti to Parabrahm, to after passing away physically, one will join the ranks of liberated souls known as Akshar Muktas and offer devotion to Parabrahm, to Supreme God, with such servitude. And so this was a deep dive into the Akshar-Purushottam Darshan. Again, there's a lot more that we can talk about, and there's a lot of videos that may come soon, and to discuss the depth of each of these entities and the different parts of the Akshar-Purushottam Darshan. However, this was a deep dive in very short, in a very brief few minutes. And in the next section, we'll look at the key scriptures of the Akshar-Purushottam Darshan, and briefly just skim over what those key scriptures are, how they came about, and why they're important. Till next time, thank you, and Jai Swaminarayan.